Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. See, the Republicans are the opponents. The Senate is the enemy. Just so you understand. So that's the point that,
and on that we agree.
Oregon was making, yes. And I apologize to everybody, but I'm in this national competition, the Luca Brazzi sound-alike contest. So I apologize for my voice today. Ms. Duggan, last week the subcommittee heard testimony from several electric utility CEOs who recommended that we create a cap-and-trade program in which virtually all of the emission credits were allocated for free to the generators of greenhouse gas emissions based on their historic emissions, with as little as 5% of the credits actually being auctioned. Such a structure was sharply criticized in a recent report by the National Commission on Energy Policy that stating that the allocation of most of these allocations for free to energy producers creates the potential for large windfall profits. What was the experience in Europe?
The experience in phase one was not dissimilar, except there wasn't 95% of 100% of need. So there was a...
not dissimilar, meaning windfall profits? There
was indeed windfall profits in phase one. And one of the things that's happening in phase two is that although there's only a maximum of 10% auctioning in phase two, that still means that we can set the cap below need for electricity producers, and indeed in the UK we've set the cap at about 30% below need for electricity producers, and they will face some auctioning. But there have been windfall profits.
Windfall profits. Mr. Bertar, could you comment on that?
Well, yes, I agree directly that there's evidence there was windfall profits. House of Commons report found that in the UK and similarly in Germany. That is extra normal profits. The change in revenues is greater than the change in their costs.
How big were the windfall profits?
These reports are suggesting they're in an order of magnitude of 2 to 3 billion euro per year in each of those cases.
In each country?
Yes.
In each country for the utilities?
For the power sector, yes.
For the power sector, yes. Ms. Duggan.
I just wanted to come back on that. It depends on the assumptions you make and the assumption of the price of allowances at the time. And UK government assessment of the size of windfall profits recognises that indeed they were windfall profits, that there was full cost passed through to industrial users but not to domestic users during 2005, and they were in the region of 800 million. Nevertheless, they were there, and it's one of the things that we're considering allocation methodology for the review for future phases.
Yeah, well, a recent study on how the German government allocated credits reports that the German utilities were set to make windfall profits of between 31 and 64 billion euros up till the end of 2012. Does that experience suggest that regulators may have a hard time ensuring that all of the financial windfall associated with the allocations of free credits to the utility industry are actually passed along to the ratepayers? You were mentioning this point about consumers. Dr. Bertal, could you get into that, please?
Well, yes, the source of those so-called windfall profits are changes in product prices. The consumers are the ones that are paying. And so these costs rise, these opportunity costs, the emission allowances are passed through in product prices. The question is who is going to be the recipient of this wealth transfer. And that's one of the reasons that people point to an auction as an equitable as well as efficient mechanism to implement the program.
Okay, Ms. Duggan, based on the European experience, do you think that we should be auctioning off most of these credits and use the resulting revenues for public benefits such as accelerated R&D on new technologies, energy efficiency, or even reducing taxes on businesses or individual consumers that might be faced with higher energy prices?
I think the use of auctioning for future phases is under discussion this year as the Commission and Member States review the Directive for Emissions Trading. I know Sweden has stated publicly that it believes that there should be full auctioning for large electricity producers. The UK Government's position is that there should be more use of auctioning, but I wouldn't want to preempt the outcome of any cross-government discussions on that. We have looked with interest at the RGGI proposals.
The RGGI proposals, meaning the proposals in eastern United States with the 9 states that are now moving towards an auctioning system as opposed to this allocation to the utilities, giving them 95 to 100% of the credits. Do you agree with that, Dr. Berton? Let me go to you, Dr. Stander. What do you think makes the most sense?
We would propose less auctioning and more insurance and reliance through pass-through provisions of windfall gains going to the electricity users. The more
going to the consumer.
To the consumer, right, to make sure it's passed on. The auction limits the price discovery process.
How would we ensure that it goes to the consumer, or to the businesses that consume electricity?
I will get back to you after the hearings with some thoughts on that without getting too laborious here. But that's what we would favor, because we think it's continuous price discovery and efficiency that is important, and do recognize the need to pass on benefits to consumers. But market efficiencies are better served by...
Well, 100% auction would be perfect price discovery, as you know, Dr. Stander. But you have these other equities. Yeah. I appreciate that, and we have to factor that in. But moving on the system that led to this German mess and other countries' messes is something I think we will replicate. Thank you. Let me go quickly to Mr. McLean. When this committee drafted the Clean Air Act amendments of 1990 that set up the cap and trade program for sulfur dioxide emissions, I was able to add a provision to the bill that allowed utilities to obtain allowances for qualified energy conservation measures that were determined by the EPA to increase the efficiency of the use of electricity provided by an electric utility to its users. Under that provision, for each ton of sulfur dioxide emissions avoided by an electric utility during the applicable period, through use of these qualified energy conservation measures, the EPA would allocate a single allowance on a first-come, first-served basis up to a cap of 300,000 allowances. How has that provision of the law worked out over the years, Mr. McLean? And what lessons would you say that the experience with that provision of the 1990 bill would have for us in the subcommittee today, were we to try to add a similar provision to the cap and trade bill for carbon?
Yes, a couple points about that. First of all, that was the first time we had ever done that you had done that, and we had implemented it. So there is something to be learned. I think when we set the incentive in that, we had 1 ton, you got 1 allowance for roughly an equivalent ton reduced from conventional power. Our experience was that we expected that reserve to be overwhelmed, and it was not. And I think the reason was that we probably had set it too much in balance, that we probably should have, and to encourage more, would have set a higher ratio.
So we set it too low. We should have set it higher if we wanted to.
If you wanted to incentivize the transfer. But I think the idea of setting a specific reserve is a way to deal with that particular issue.
And are you nodding your head in agreement, Dr. Sandor? Yeah, and how high should it have been? Could you give us quickly?
Yeah, I'd have to relook at that, but it clearly, setting it at that level was not enough.
If you, Dr. McLean, Mr. McLean and Dr. Sandor, could tell us how high you thought we should, looking back at that sector, that would help us. I thank the chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Markey. The gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Shadegg, is recognized for 5 minutes.